Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hey listeners, it's Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and today is part one of a two-part series on public health and gambling. In this episode, sports betting isn't just something you do at a casino anymore. It's on your phone and available 24/7. For many, it's harmless fun. But public health experts are increasingly worried about how betting apps, constant promotions, and rapid-fire in-game wagers may raise the risks of addiction, especially for young men. Today, Johns Hopkins economists Dr. Matthew Eisenberg and Dr. Mark Meiselbach talked to Stephanie Desmond about how this new era of online betting is shaping behavior. Look out for part two of this series, where we'll take a closer look at gambling addiction, including diagnosis and treatment. Let's listen. Matt Eisenberg and Mark Meiselbach, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So today we're going to talk about gambling as a public health crisis. Matt, paint a picture of what we're seeing. I know that when I'm watching the Super Bowl this weekend and when I'm watching other sports, I'm constantly bombarded with advertisements to bet on the game, bet on who gets the first hit. I mean, all kinds of things that I can bet on. Talk to me about how we got here.
Sure. Historically, this was the type of activity, sports gambling, that had to be done in a casino or some other designated place. And then in 2018, there was a Supreme Court case that overturned the federal ban on mobile sports gambling. What happened is that returned it to the states. So the states were allowed to decide whether or not they wanted to allow this type of activity. And a lot of states decided that they do want to allow this activity. So we saw a lot of big entrants into the market over the past several years. Firms like DraftKings and FanDuel, as well as a lot of others that allow for gambling on sports events right from your phone. And I think you pointed out one interesting feature about this is, one, you can bet on who's going to win the game, right? Which is what people traditionally think about when they think about sports gambling. Bet on these more micro things that might happen during the game, right? You can bet how fast the next pitch is going to be. You can bet if there's going to be a home run, and you can bet consistently over time and watch the odds change dynamically throughout the game. So it becomes a dynamic back and forth process.
Mark, this really feels like a recipe for addiction. Talk to me about what you're seeing.
Some of the concerns here is, the sort of like rapid cycle events and opportunities to bet are some of the more concerning aspects of this. Rather than, think about sort of at the other end of the spectrum, like a fantasy sports league, which, a lot of people have gotten involved with. Maybe you bet $20 with your friends, and then, the outcome is so delayed that by the end of the year, is the payout, and maybe you're still invested or not. But here we're talking about moment-to-moment events, and you can bet and you can try to recover your losses, and this sort of rapid cycle and sort of mixed rewards are potentially addictive.
Matt, what was it, do you think, that made online betting cross from the line from like interesting to urgent as a public health issue?
First, when we look at the statistics of use of these products, they're really common, right? So half of, or more than half now, of young men have one of these apps on their phone right now and have used them in the past year. So a lot of people are using these. I think when it crosses, and I think it's important to note that most people who use them are not going to develop gambling problems, are not going to develop addiction, and they're just going to use it and enjoy it. I bet on sports, Mark's bet on sports, and it can be a fun activity. Now, there's going to be a small subset of that population that uses these products that's going to be at risk of developing an addiction. And you talked about what's the thing that crossed the line. I think it's the prevalence combined with the advertising and the outreach and the omnipresence of it. And three, I think more broadly, there's a discussion in the country about a crisis among young men in this country and unemployment and substance use and alcohol misuse. And this kind of feeds into that destructive spiral for, again, a small subset of people. But because it can be so destructive, it's really important from a public health standpoint to look at this.
And maybe I'll just add that I think we're sort of at a critical juncture as well where, 31 states and DC have legalized online sports gambling. And there's a real opportunity to try to understand what the effects have been. There's heterogeneity in the underlying laws. Some states allow people as young as 18 to bet. Some states don't. Others ban college sports betting. So there's kind of a moment here to learn as we think about sort of the rollout, across the country and other potentially more addictive sorts of betting that could be legalized in the future.
What would that look like?
So there are 7 states, I believe, currently that legalize iGaming, which is like online slot machines, basically casino games you can play on your phone, which have the potential to be even more addictive, perhaps, than some sports gambling, which are sort of tied to a real event and sort of limited in that way.
And I think I'll just add, like, in those 7 states that have legalized iGaming, it's huge. It's a small amount of people, but they play a lot. And the revenue going into these online slot machines and blackjack tables and roulette wheels is really, really high. So to the extent that sports gambling can provide a entree into this world, it's potentially risky for some folks.
As the mother of 2 20-something boys, this concerns me immensely. For full disclosure, when they asked in Maryland a decade or more ago if I would support casino gambling, I said no. So this has taken on a life of its own in ways that I couldn't even have imagined. I'm curious, Matt, what surprised you most when you started researching online sports betting?
I think I was surprised by how many things you can bet on, because I've only used these apps a couple times and I'm pretty light touch with it. So, I bet on who's going to win the Super Bowl, those types of events. And to log in and see people betting on how fast the next pitch is going to be, I was very surprised. And I think that also brings us into this newer market, prediction markets, which are proliferating. And they're right now, at least, under a different set of regulations than sports gambling. But a ton of sports gambling is happening on these apps as well. And there you can really bet on anything. Mark and I were looking at it last week or 2 weeks ago, and there was a bet how many minutes the White House press briefing was going to go. Was it going to be over 61 minutes? And the odds dynamically changing over time. So really creating a market for betting on anything.
Mark, this seems unhealthy to me. Tell me that if I'm overreacting.
First, on sports gambling, the prediction markets might be sort of its own thing. I think that latter one does seem unhealthy to me. But Matt touched on it. I think for a lot of people, it won't be unhealthy. It's a way to maybe, engage with friends or increase your enjoyment for the game. A $1 on an event might sort of make you more locked into the event and really pose no risk to you. And that's probably the majority of users that are using it that way. But for a minority of users, there is, a lot of potential harm potentially. And without guardrails to prevent sort of repeated large bets or people digging themselves in a hole, there will be people who are harmed by the legalization of these products.
And I think we can put these type of guardrails there, right? Like there's things we can do to prevent people from falling into, 1, financial ruin, or 2, putting themselves at risk for a variety of other conditions. The rate of mental health conditions is higher among those with gambling disorder, the rate of alcohol use, the rate of domestic violence, the rate of drug use, like all of these things, which all have direct public health impacts, right? We can potentially put some policy guardrails there.
What kinds of policy guardrails?
One is some type of limit, and some states are starting to, and some leagues are starting to experiment with different limits here. And that's some limits on these proposition bets or prop bets, right? So saying that you can no longer bet thousands of dollars every pitch on how fast the pitch is going to be. So I think it's Ohio that recently has been pushing for limits on these prop bets. And the MLB has also put in a national kind of self-regulatory mechanism where they're saying that they won't participate in it anymore. So a lot of these tools exist.
And so what Matt's talking about is like these live game prop bets, right? So that sort of has this rapid cycling reward, a mixed reward that we might be concerned about. I mean, there's other straightforward ones, like people can't link their credit cards and go into, massive debt For example, you can limit the age and require age verification at the point of sign up. Some states, there are a handful of states that allow people as young as 18, 19, and 20. Most states only allow for 21 plus, but you could up the age limit, for example. A lot of states place restrictions on college sports as well and don't allow, students to bet on college campuses or don't allow anyone to bet on college sports in general. Some of this is, out of concern for the athletes. I think some of the limitations on prop bets are also around that, but any of these strategies could limit harm.
Yeah, I think another one would be this mandatory or universal self-exclusion. A lot of states in the casino world have the ability to kind of self-exclude yourself, saying, do not let me bet in this casino. And some states have universal self-exclusion where you can ban yourself from all casinos. So similarly, right now, you can self-exclude yourself from one of these apps, but then you can just download another the next day. So now, is it possible some states are thinking about doing universal self-exclusion where the state is going to regulate and say your IP address is banned from these apps?
It feels like there's so much money in this right now that it might be hard to get policymakers to make changes. Is that something that's getting in the way, Matt?
So I think that's one thing that we've talked about, and we've talked about with others too, is we're not advocating for or arguing against a ban on sports gambling. We're totally agnostic there. But I think if you look realistically in the political economy of what's going on, it's not going to be banned, right? This is a huge industry. So set aside whether you think it's a good idea or not, that's not going to happen. Our focus is around policy tools that can really limit that far tail of harms rather than things that are going to lead to a total ban or things that are just not feasible. And so I think that's where we want to focus the policy efforts on things that can both happen and curtail the greatest harms.
You mentioned Major League Baseball. How involved are the sports leagues in this?
I think the sports leagues are quite involved. I mean, the leagues have formed partnerships over time to sort of allow betting to happen in their stadiums, for ads to be displayed. But I think, and this is just me sort of as an outside observer and a fan of baseball, what it seems to me is that they're particularly concerned where athletes have gotten involved and kind of threatens the legitimacy of the sport, and so if people can't believe that the product that they're watching is legitimate and not, biased by some online bets, then I think they might lose potential viewers. So they are concerned. So far, it seems that it's mostly been reactionary. There's been some major scandals in the MLB and the NBA, but I think, leagues are sort of watching this closely.
Matt, if nothing changes in 5 years, what worries you the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. If nothing changes in 5 years, then I'm worried about the proliferation of that is a huge risk to a large number of people, and the harms are just so high. Potential harms are just so high. So I worry that this is when these firms see, and again, the sports betting firms operate full online casinos in the states where it's allowed. So it's not hypothetical. So probably that.
And Mark, I'm going to give you the last word.
I agree with Matt on iGaming. I also am sort of tracking these prediction markets and maybe not even limited to sports, but I am not excited about a future where we're betting on every single micro event that happens in politics and sports. And so I think that's something that concerns me.
Matt Eisenberg and Mark Meiselbach, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, Stephanie Desmond, and Rachel Walsh. Audio production by Michael Bonfils, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from J.B. Arbogast, Spencer Greer, and Chip Hickey. Distribution and social media by Rachel Walsh, with support from Nick Moran and Brianna Iacovelli. Follow us on Instagram and Blue Sky at Public Health Pod for more public health takes and special content. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.